very large value. COVID makes it more likely Washington 20 gene editing made viral and pathogen easier pandemics because first adversaries like a no cohort would be influenced like COVID because they're pursuing a bioweapon tools are dual use and difficult to regulate. Federal action is key to expand communication, offer domestic reassurance, and offer clearances. Local agencies are excluded from federal forensic science infrastructure. NRC and 09 forensic science has not been included in Homeland Security expertise and infrastructure use does not invest in such capacity. Now reported for assistance security responded to WA before is reported to train local responders for restructure search capacity. There's also training at the national level. State to be given classified where state laws provide there are no consistent plans for using local resources. The plan improves efficiency of analysis and expands Homeland Security investments, improves infrastructure, creates interoperability need for counter-terror operations. NRC and 09. Forensic science clear value for Homeland Security routine collection of evidence, identify suicide efforts, regular federal additional training, new Congress by planning to amplify CDC and FBI for managing evidence web, training planning for interoperability. Local federal organization, only an independent foundation gets the job done. National academies and 15 challenges facing forensic science program, a forensic science properly, blind breadth of forensic available to RNC to have control the kind of the charge routine and critical element of any effective strategy need to designate detective front of already because demonstrate the importance of on these facing the forensic science skill, any other strategy, deck, psychological health, preparation, assuage, anxieties, or sign at all, and no for and primary goals to say stabilize the public space and institute might be results and disappointed recovery for an organized person the absence of plans by scale leadership behavior to action management will set the tone for the societal response to prepare minimize the psychological social an essential part of planning to do that breakdown or risk panic need to be targeted continuous on your for diverse groups to plan the United States federal government and accidental criminal justice reform in the area of forensic science for preparation and funding of crimes investigators for the role in managing and analyzing the evidence relevant to Homeland Security advantage choose innovation unpredictable federal support Dexit that destroys collaboration needed for crime fighting communication and tech advancement Inspector General in 17 U.S. National Security depends on the ability to share with the right crystal among federal local any deep understanding shows the role of has been uneven access classified but until reporting made the intel less effective operates sustained rather than and has capabilities lack of direct support weakens the HS oversight and blurs the role of local departments Inspector General in 17 state centers depend on support and funding for federal agencies like already cost I was collecting data funding it's not a bunch of line I'm engaged with that now to the other funding source states decline but may lose oversight lacks enforcement for establishment and hold centers accountable has no skin sale will not give them anything but increasing funding and training solves COVID 6 target capabilities must be after collaborative aggregation the junior preparedness greater than individual restrictions benefits collaboration are greater will finally have a picture identified sure like the optimal allocation scale those local cool will allowing sovereignty will find in Homeland Security preferences will be provided well is providing guidelines milestones and funding government should change will capabilities law enforcement techniques are modeled in military environments Wilson et al. In 19 greater part with law and the criminal justice and military expansion forensic science will integrate criminal to provide framework for end-to-end forensic coalition force employed forensic science to ID threat counter and UAV absence of organized forensic result knowledge for it is not effectively integrated at the national level chemical attacks cause extinction Gander 18 humanity being landed by every will to animal fast new tag one be too many biochem warfare are potential threats to humanity. Weapons are cheap to advance in biology, make it easier. Could cause a pandemic failure to counter drone attacks. Goes nuclear. Callenborn and Bleak in 19. Drone sworn. Impact military competition. Hesitant to deliver nuclear bombs to a state event. This new technology offers with CV armament with the small smart energy platforms. The costs are already low and likely to improve the ability to defeat nuclear war more. Start the nuclear company. Drone-based chemical and biological weapons have the potential to significantly improve chemical and biological weapons delivery. Coordination for unknown to secure stockpiles. They could including CRM materials, smuggling searches for cities, search for gaseous boom. Drones help with everything carbon to expand its ongoing recurring and appears to focus on drones but not CBR on specific applications. Contention 3 is impact framing, raising the threat levels important key to national and international responses to disease and when combined with public health response is demilitarizing babies in 17. For the last 2 decades, scientists and diplomats for the health security, the true predictor, harness global leadership that remain through most nation building because health involved now state interested in critical agreements the issue remain atop the foreign policy high. But you know one to emphasize to protect individual as much as states were seen as equal president and sovereignty is responsibility and helicopter extended was the only tool has been added is displaced others. The operation of India dominated for more than 5 million small part of the case of the cure international to achieve health goals. Specifically, preemptive securitization is key. But the one I see in current security discourse will only be operationalized during the pandemic, but starting early as per the AF primes the public for preventive care and efficient response could contend pandemic. Will be multi-sectoral access to the military, the political, and the source of the makes it possible for diseases as relates to the government was beginning to identify panic and started for more considered precaution to build Americans veteran people with the renewed and the heights and really there's black of securitization when the the aftermath the issue returns our actors are both considered for Christ and this could eventually be secret after supplies that less limited policy could be still before increasing efficiency once it has to be undertaken. Infringing on individual autonomy is justified in this context. Widows and 13 autonomy has become dominant. However, choices not trump other concerns negates and science other claims and wholly unsatisfactory values over if they all the unethical nonsense now are so important not sustainable to use the presented who for all a group because the benefit of the evil science has become a better future which is into a legitimate context where the individual actually benefits are global goods. These now being no respecter of borders. Some will be more affected, the poor, and these will be more vulnerable. Ultimately, all of our such goods are supremely valuable. They should be prioritized on any ethical framework unless collective goods would be threatened if you're a small one compared to the overall cost. I didn't read Samarji.
Okay, are you good for cross?
Just give me 1 sec. I need to switch my camera. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start on the National Research Council evidence. It says, forensic science played an important role in investigating the bombing of the Pan Am Flight 103, the World Trade Center, the Oklahoma City bombing, and the suspected sabotage of Trans World Airline Flight 800. All of those things seem to be like after the fact prosecution of criminals. How do those establish like a preventative role in preventing bioterror attacks?
I disagree with that. I think that you're kind of blurring the line between post-disaster response and also preemptive preparation. I would refer you to the Cholum evidence, which says that, or Cholum and Bidwell and Bott, like microbial forensic research is not only for, what?
Can you spell Cholum?
Oh, Cholum, Chollom.
Okay.
So the Bidwell and Bott evidence says that microbial forensic research is not only for like prosecution, but it also leads to the development of other like technologies like vaccines, treatments, etc. But then also Cholum is, okay, once it's happened, the most important factor for our response to that will be identifying the bioagent, prosecuting the people that were responsible, organizing a collective response, etc.
Right, but obviously prosecuting those responsible doesn't mitigate the damage caused by the bio attack. This also is talking about epidemiological surveillance and microbial forensics, and that those would need to interplay to contract source. But then on the innovation advantage, your Wilson et al. 19 evidence says the expeditionary forensic science support to military operations goes beyond the IED threat. It is employed to also counter threats from conventional weapons, such as the large sniper threat encountered in Iraq. How would like epidemiological surveillance and biomicrobial tracing be used to prevent a sniper threat?
It likely wouldn't. Like,
okay, so then
the F would just be about like attacks in the United States, but it's asinine to assume that the vaccines or treatments or whatever tech we develop wouldn't be exported to other countries. Like that's how it's happened during COVID.
To be clear though, that Colacard or Cholum doesn't seem to say the word vaccine. It just says medical response, which could include like ICUs or something, but whatever. The second advantage about innovation, if it isn't things like snipers, what kind of innovation does the AF claim to spur?
Well, okay, in the context of the second advantage, we think that we lead to broader military innovation. Your previous question was just, how does the sniper relate to bioterror, which I answered.
Well, if the innovation is like
the Wilson evidence is saying that like law enforcement forensic labs are integrated with military innovation. They have done things like, for example, innovate in UAVs. If we were to fund that, prepare them, train them, etc.,
expeditionary forces, forensic science in Iraq and Afghanistan, coalition military forces employed forensic science beyond its traditional law enforcement investigation and criminal justice objectives to military operations. The IED threat faced by coalition partners, etc. So how are those things intimately linked? Because it seems like the military has its own
research gets exported
to use the tech.
Like federal law enforcement will trade with the military. What you just read.
Beyond law enforcement techniques, not that those are linked or inspired by one another. Where's the export claim? There's no claim of sharing information anywhere in the card.
Like
it just says that the
first
military
line says that there is a massive partnership between law enforcement, the criminal justice, and military applications.
The aim is to promote greater partnerships. That's normative, not descriptive.
Yeah, because that's what fusion centers are designed to do. Fusion centers suck now. The plan bolsters that.
Okay. I just sent it. It's 1, 2, 6 off, and then the first advantage, and then the second advantage.
Just give me 1 sec.
Yes. I know you can't. Let me switch. Let me know when you're good.
I'm ready.
I'm just opening the doc. Give me like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Or 1 minute. You're good.
Okay, is anyone else not good? Topicality, forensic science, to casework, non-general science, restoration, forensic application at school, searching around for forensic science, preparing individual primarily on case might discuss forensic scientists on describing individual primary occupation, scientific research application, habits being forensic science, and research on figure patterns, not forensic scientist, he's not a research scientist, he does research not care about negative forces, limits are infinite, not casework, research applications, innovation, competition, author advantages, second is ground, casework is the core criminal justice ground, next ops, the executive counterpart, the United States executive branch, it can be relevant federal, state agencies, laboratories, and stakeholders, develop a national forensic science, solidify federal agency commitment, support the creation of new forensic science databases, oversee regular review and prioritization of research to ensure compliance, implement a successful and fundamentally allocates funding. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm pressing my timer. My doc got all weird. Okay. Where was I? Oh, that allocates funding towards forensic science labs and complies with the national strategy to solve the Holton about the executive branch. We revealed this Holton at all 16. There's urgent for the forensic science of the OSTP should be relevant federal to have national research strategy, ensure foundational research and support forensic science as well accordingly federally solidify federal commitments, galvanize action, funding that can be taken to increase research improvement, improve forensic methods, support new research database, and receive regular prioritization of research funding conditions exist, come off by pre-existing grants and incentivize state and locality compliance at 40 and 20 or 14 presidential extenders current review all criminal justice grants success started funding clarify existing grants and success started funding as well as federal criminal justice grants they administer and achieve strong executive actions and signal a moment for change created task force on federal criminal justice grants review each created toward that they choose the intended priorities recast of grants and success or fundamental for competitive grants agencies should condition grant funding where the recipients make clear goals and success measures for grants or agencies cannot track the condition funds agencies create new programs to provide additional funding for recipients who meet success measures next also the immigration decided passes now the plans of the summit all for the 747 on the budget reconciliation on the horizon democratic aligning measures vehicle for immigration the Senate parliamentary rule that the revised budget resolution could be used to pass on the reconciliation we make about the budget impact of immigration Nancy Pelosi said democratic aid smoke ways of multiple democratic senators including immigration and future reconciliation bill including Durban and putting amended as will not foreclose any children policies as also than the reconciliation against the opposite reconciliation legislation to be tough on immigration priorities to avoid having more aggressive the choose the immigration citizen panel thinks there's a strong case to make the calls military recruitment crisis immigration cells at Jackson and 17 many immigration ones won't join my friends but able to find opportunities for limited because my legal status I can't train the military without recruiting immigrants the social population make for available recruits 13% of 17 to 24 years are qualified to serve just 4% will be willing to qualify to serve military is for slower and standards these circumstances would change the Congress from immigration policies and comprehensive immigration for making it easier for people to get the green cards is open to pull large folks who be eligible recruitment challenges decimate deterrence and readiness as well and 12 the United States maintain robust military and 5% of young people not qualified to and the recent high school graduates 30% or 2 of the shortest skill human capital terms of military ability to deploy technologies that can sophisticated advertise which generals question too many new enlistees cannot read much training manuals for the head of the army training means that the lack of fully funded quality rules and international security readiness provides great power this point at all middle 19 the great power competition to armed security so long as the trouble conflicts the requires over to the values and arousal pet that overseas later over the man and catch up promises it was good power rapidly because good power reaching Moscow need to react to this saying user conflict question about emphasize the news and you can represent world return great power shack question now one of the regional power despite the reaction with by expires in every extra regional attack Moscow be pointing to Middle East China and these ambitions were bold to further also trying to military forces even farther reaching protected further the Arctic News plus force the Indian Arctic in the Indian in the Iron Africa she told the CCP the beach states to act alternative use of provision maybe only be thinking China's will move the show like greater depth to geopolitical revisions and past results and intensified national and international competition where America should bolster its defense next office being interpretation they express formally FNX and the violation of political creates funding strategy and increases funding but doesn't what that strategy or funding includes vote NAC versus limited infinite number of regulatory mechanisms tools and the incentives that can be implemented to solve the advantages now force themselves to remove any predictable ground contracts for net preparation second is ground lack mechanism and implementation residing links to dissets and tanks counterpoint policy next steps of funding pick Department of Homeland Security to restructure its budget and adopt substantial commitments reform in the area of forensic science and preparation and funding of scientists and crimes investigators for their role in managing and analyzing evidence relevant to Homeland Security type budget the DHS biosecurity bioterror security trace out border militarization funding this matchy and until the DHS facing budget questions biological defense portfolio but the Department of Science and Technology director to 80% budget cut the chemical biological defense is saying much more significant that part of the reserve budget because increased border security protection on the Senate border having 50,000 more questions of border protection issues the increase in the number of detention facilities for undocumented immigrants escape this is the time consuming budget border securitization and then enforcement structure kills thousands of the tradable that's Jones 17 Stewart plans including case by the border patrol to use resources of the social lines and that surrounds the U.S. Mexico border recover more than 6,000 bodies of deaths attributable to massive border patrol plans and new border patrol strategy for includes judicial tests on recovered body next up is that calls out claims across the state of incarceration for the GAD criminal justice reform is ability to child that enables one for the insidious forms of settler elimination at the entity and 20 structures come to all decision comments and individuals rights consent the back tax workers allowed to elimination child continue child and most mass incarceration ongoing disposition incarceration not say policy directed loan banks to foreign indigenous people's experience one subordination resilience areas this has been a phase of mass incarceration yet another iteration of indigenous people's long experience to settlers images to segregate and contain Indigenous peoples, Indigenous incarceration, our constitution to further Indigenous systems and law, removing the need for over politics, force, or tool disproportionately, and regulate Native people, but not to decolonize justice. That's Anthony Block 20, version by New Jeans, so turning South Cruiser for other forms of criminals is not solely the exploitation strategies, including forcible dispossession, forcibility, and constitutional legitimacy, particularly systematically U.S. never try ourselves exculpatory narrative subject to our exempted from its protections could decolonize justice and possess be reforming into decolonization more long-term possibility new relationships based between the mainstream Indigenous roles or new arbitrages as personal and communal healing has been denied through and using the bitter life for hyper incarceration and hashtag extinction first remains Western conservation logic. That's Mitchell 17 extinction to false disruption inflation to dissolution of Indigenous system of governance laws from political policies of assimilation undermines the forms of order unnecessary for survival colonial genocides and body all destruction by displacing Indigenous communities undermining governance and colonial bonds fundamental of extinction response to the extinction to focus on emerging populations use source bonds taxing the their power effort to address extinction to focus on identifying dismantling formations of boundaries from relations to response to extinction rooted in the Western sense of conservation exacerbate the destruction of the relations between Indigenous peoples and their relations to structures of colonization untouched and exacerbate them confronting extinction causes decolonization on their ethos that will enable the ongoing flourishing of the decolonization as for ensuring the ongoing support life forms. The first event is microbial forensics funding is way up. We posted by 10 news that Chairman and Bubble 19 federal spending was civilian biodefense increased 414 million 6.69 billion in 2014 funding has helped initiate biodefense programs and research efforts to provide forensic capability and microbial forensic investigations, disease outbreak preparedness and response, COVID, thumbs, contact tracing hasn't worked to stop the spread. No bioterror. That's when you mean 20 young terrorists and one other no one died. Al Qaeda and the Islamic State have stopped these efforts to steal on the fatalities. Cancer worship has been launching sophisticated attacks about terrorist past, which is isolated anti-Semitic requests significant expertise with not safe maintained contained environments from the negotiations challenge disseminations like the terrorist groups plus research stable environmentations even if terrorists somehow succeed in single but because partial coronavirus no one disease on the US preventions peace weaponized extreme hard to find science for bio legitimate person not contagious like all we live to cope with outbreaks anti not contagious the idea was engineered safe quite comprehensive examination changes the terrorists to be capable of engineering a virus that associates risks to the virtually zero small scale attacks may be possible risk of highly advanced or pathogenic that spreads among populations is very low. The second advantage it makes no sense. They don't say what innovation they create. Forensic scientists do things like DNA. They're not innovating for tech to counter drone sites or anything based because their evidence says that the military goes beyond partnerships with law enforcement. Not that those two things are required to build off of each other, or they also have any evidence that the military is lacking now. Just that law enforcement's lacking now. Their link card is way underhouted. It doesn't actually make an argument that they spill over. And we just funded the shit out of NIST a while ago, which obviously should solve this international regulation, solve autonomous weapons and drones going never. That's Steffer 20 going never for legislators, private companies and organizations which doesn't call it but fully but autonomous weapons due to 2,000 countries one of this Trump's legal binding engine could come a new protocol originating which we should be a standalone process, no chemical attacks, no motivated any terrorist groups, and has capability. What chemicals obviously nobody cares about this. They also said that they only solve for attacks that originate from within the United States. Obviously, no one's being stupid enough to come into the United States, engineer chemical attack, and then launch it from the United States. And the same thing with drones. No one's coming to the US building drones and then using drones in the United States. Also, other forms of law enforcement. We saw obviously people who monitor the grid, who do things like track the AFA records for drones, microbial forensic tracing, camp friends, snipers, and chemical attacks. We can't extradite people, which is an all cause, or they only solve stuff in the US, but they have not unique evidence that there are attacks in the US now. Disease doesn't kill us. That's Law 16. Humanity can continue to flourish. We live to domestic microbial links, which unlike the apocalyptic pathogen need to be so unfamiliar and transmissibility and influenza, HIV, and Ebola don't meet those requirements. Every other disease falls for evolutionary heritage. Our immune system with our vaccines, and the system can adapt to any enemy imaginable. Coupled genetic variations, any infectious disease will leave a large proportion of the human population alive. Even more powerful protectors, conscious humans alter and improve their environments. Colin, I have more time. What would you like me to do? I guess I'll just read that last card. That's that call. Any skills that seek to pour on a debate are that storm state resulting impacts on communities and churches, the by resulting marginalization, oppression, strategic cognitive to achieve the justice for crimes perpetrated against absurd concessions to indigenous peoples, really the potential time to indigenous owners to see this as go deep sound racial economic divide, confusion, plus to average level of the playing field have failed. That card was marked it failed.
Okay, are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, so set call. What is the alternative? Is it a floating pick?
No, we don't think it can solve the F. We think that it was just the dismantling of the criminal justice system, things like prison riots, prison breaks, essentially similar to like what abolition would look like, but we don't fiat that.
So do you feel that that was my question. Do you feel that those things happen?
We fiat, oh, my computer's being weird. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we fiat like an increasing intensity in decolonial anti-militarist movements. So there would be occurrences such as prison breaks, sheltering people from ICE, etc. But we don't fiat the success of those movements, so you can still get offense based on that. Also, we think that the alternative
why don't you need to win that those movements are successful?
So we don't fiat that they're successful. We'll win that.
We think that they'll be successful. We'll win that. But
so
it.
The examples that you'll defend are like invading prisons and then like breaking them or burning them down, something like that.
Like a host of direct action movements like that, yeah.
So why wouldn't like the military, law enforcement react to those?
So we think, oh, you want to answer, Carl?
Go ahead, yeah.
We think that number one, the force and momentum created by those movements would be able to overcome that. We think that number two, there's capacity for like infiltration in the
force. Do they have tanks, like weapons? I mean, the military does.
You think that the sheer number of people would be able to overcome the military?
What? You think that even like 1,000 people can take down a tank?
Well, like tanks? A bunch of poppy farmers in Afghanistan were able to like evade the U.S. military for like over a decade, and now it's retreating. So clearly, like the U.S. military is actually pretty structurally inept.
You're talking about storming a prison that exists now that is
there
guarded
are
by
prison breaks
guards.
In like Segovia, Spain, and Greece, etc. Like it's actually not that difficult.
Okay.
There's a prison riot occurring in Ohio.
You think Spain
right
is as militarized as the United States? You think Spain is as militarized as the United States?
You've gotten our answer.
Okay. The immigration politics decide, like your uniqueness card is like there are discussions with like 5 senators total. Where does this make a claim that it's going to pass?
It makes the argument that it's going to go through reconciliation now.
Yeah, but does it mean it's going to be successful?
No, it says that top.
Like they're preparing to put it through reconciliation. There's a chance.
It says that top Democratic aides are pretty like set on including immigration and reconciliation.
Wait, are you talking about the sentence that says a Democratic aide spoke with multiple Democratic senators, Durbin and Padilla? So 2 senators, 1 aide has talked about this bill.
Menendez.
That's who is focused on this bill right now.
Menendez from New Jersey. You forgot the person from Washington. There's more people.
Okay, so 4 senators, 1 aide. That aide is going to push this bill through Congress right now since they're so unfocused on infrastructure. No one cares about that.
The aide is talking to top people and they're like, we're going to do immigration through reconciliation.
Okay. The executive counterplan, like what does it mean to convene those relevant agencies and then develop a national forensic strategy?
So it would just increase preparedness for whatever the app does. Like your plan text is so insanely vague. I think that you can't be like, what is a strategy? Like make your plan text clearer.
We're going to run prep. Let me call hello quickly and then I'll start. Wait, did all go somewhere? I'm not prepping. I'll unmute. I don't know where he went. Oh, there he is. Okay, I'm starting prep. Right, we used a minute. I'm sending the doc. Okay, it should be sent. Let me know when everyone's good for an order.
I haven't gotten it yet.
Yeah, my laptop's been kind of slow in sending, so
No worries.
can wait a minute. Did it come through now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm gonna have it.
Ani, you're good too.
Yeah, I'm good for an order.
Okay. The order is the bioterror advantage, the innovation advantage, the T forensic science, vagueness, the condition funding counterplan, the restructure, the DHS pick, whatever you want to call it, sec call, and then the disad. I can repeat that one more
Funding
time.
counterplan is the executive counterplan, right?
Yeah. Well, there was like the condition funding one, and then there was one which was like restructure the border wall one or whatever. I don't know how to separate them. It's whatever the condition funding.
But could you repeat that again? Yeah.
Yeah. First advantage, second advantage, T forensic, vagueness, the funding counterplan, like the condition funding counterplan, the restructure, the DHS counterplan, set call, and then the immigration disadvantage. Good. My timer. 1C1 funding is not enough because it also is about computer security, clearances, integration training, etc. All of those things that the affirmative actually does. The threshold for them to win inherency is winning the converse of the following statement in the doc. That's the NRC 09 evidence proves the AF is about interoperability between local forensic and federal counterterrorism and about the role of managing evidence that correlates to homeland security. 1, the AF creates an independent revenue stream. The NASEM 15 evidence indicates a lack of forensic tools and lack of R&D signal unpredictable federal funding levels in order to retain talent and dedicate the prioritization of research and independent stream is key to infrastructure and effectiveness. Second, the evidence does not say state funding is the issue, but that federal funds have been waning and doesn't take into account state interest. 24 public health food flag devices got there public health budget tackling infectious disease. I had actually dropped the ICAP was last fund 1990 has been active for 8 years of public health emergency population we said $4.5 billion annual investment US going to be able to strong public health spaces cycle disaster and galaxy flushes public health experience health prevention we're temporary. 1C number 2 COVID is not dump. It didn't work a little and it's unique because preparedness was low. 1C3 this card ignores future tech. 1C Larson does future tech makes it impossible for even a DIY biohacking company also doesn't assume mega cities demographic change warming and biodiversity stuff. The innovation advantage the one see number 1 is who didn't read our evidence properly. The inspector general card says that fusion centers provide a pipeline. Wilson says that it includes disease drones etc. 1C3 no card for NIST funding. I don't know what that is. 1C4 non-responsive. It's not about banning weapons but dominance development is Neville Esper Caliborn and Bleak. 1C5 yes chemical tech scanner says that efforts are Remigo or it says non-state actors like Noco. You know on 1C number 6 microbial tracing is separate from innovation. 1C number 7 the adultery evidence goes affirmative. I'll read a rehousing adultery 16 the none of this is all three say I don't know pangolation people have infrastructure T forensic science. 1 we meet the AF increased forensic science for acts of terrorism in the United States plan takes in a vacuum if we're there right then we only solve techniques in which forensic analysis is done. 2 forensic science reform refers to changing techniques to confirm guilt or innocence which is neutral ideological. Forensic science reform exit before the innocence crisis forensic science inadequately research techniques not being involved insufficient research character training insufficient. 3rd prefer A's AF ground all grounds based on process undergoing forensic analysis all just picks that mood clash and still to be changing to an oral analysis to be predictable excluding anyone process forensic science allows negative unpredictably shift the goalpost meeting Afghan and stable local condensation turns clash and top education failing to define procedure moves research instead of C's prisoner or F defines how the police enforce law which is in line forensic duty. Their interpret it defines forensic and reform there's no violation because their inter is analogous to hot means warm and dog means puppy so hot dog equals warm puppy. 5 4 no ground law still get linked for forensic analysis bad. 5 in now limits explosion teams are incentivized to create big plantics without defending an entire area. 6 functional limits ESR say abolition core politics. 2027 reasonability sufficient ground for both interrupts means substance crowd always minor underlimit vagueness any vagueness gets fiction. 20 if it becomes a part of how Congress strategy not reflecting instead of category chambers agree to re-enroll the vote changes. 2 we meet the we reform preparedness funding and everything is explained on case. 3 cross extracts you can just ask us what the app does for they're overloading unpredictable what's the bright line or threshold for what is not big enough. 6 no ground loss functional limits from previous checks. 7 all ground is based on forensic science holistically not specific words. 8 no plan is in abilities isn't all details which was that bigness is now and crossed by reasonability funding capital. 1 it doesn't solve cooperative federalism decks innovation because states are coerced and cannot experiment which directs fusion center innovation. 2nd perm both must be Congress be involved haste 20 police somebody to leverage cops and priority by reference to condition eligible to such forensic policy new policies cops for 243 million just for a million jobs because of how the agency below the progress of constitutional welfare to make it across the country or strike and he would and restaurant condition is spending the person as act by every single condition 30 actors violation constitution separation proud anti types of condition funding coverage by federal according striking education for efforts to condition coverage with the person lots of you know a lot of the ad condition 30 links snap and fit because of sites of Congress and defund by Congress press and the executive for authority per law and for thoroughly dependent. You're to only Congress person by red for head comes to hand with the not accomplish much Congress impossible condition like Congress routinely dissuades now pursuing first regulation understanding for perm the capital must be textually functionally competitive with the resolution. Anything else has the ability of generate solvency advocacy security. Textual differences arbitrary exception normal means which moves impredictable Afghan clash. 5 doesn't solve federal funding capital. Only fiat's conditions funding for state entities. 6 doesn't solve pensions bubble. Would have been triggered 4 years ago. Conditioning makes it worse for down bad states whose main issue is incentive of resource. 7 process capital or bad steel Afghan by recycling infinite process. Actions observing actions of the plan preventing to see add-ons destroys nuance clash which prerequisite to critical thing topic specific deliberation equitable points of engagement. The next capital and 1 funding must be done by Congress. Now 16 Congress funding for Homeland Security appropriation House and the second there no way to limit congressional funding powers disturbing all control of public expenditure stability. No federal state 88 federal agents no 30 engagement no additional funds. It's must be made to pursue no constitutional appropriation no spending except presumably legislative appropriate all government must be pursuing legislative authority where finance donation of constitutional initial payment of funds authorized by Congress. Third power of the person key to stop executives worst access by like 20 Congress to give the power to set by national policy authorized Texas spending bill control not the government power to Congress the core power to boundaries Congress is the president potential transition power member who's president Congress performs the constitutional duties of research oversight duty. 4 perm do both the simultaneous action removes controversy and solves because it restructures in a positive way. 5 do perm to the accountable injustice. I think executive agencies have to AP which government possibly which agency enact law. 6 links agenda rising forward Congress to counter executive order holding up bills on public acts so have need lasting political consequences. 7 ambiguity HR 11 Congress resolution will result in ambiguity resulting need for seek out encouraging our difficult increase 8 Plantex doesn't say that they actually restructure 9 there's no interlink for border wall or terminal impact. 10 Biden is stopping border wall construction now. 10 11 Congress voting nation encourage run guns stress SQ try enforce Afghan moves offense and kills fairness and ability avoids in-depth testing cost benefit analysis produce advocacy skills education disposal solves kick with firms in defense. The K framework we get the advocates a critique and they need when plan specific links in FBI all that means links must generate uniqueness beyond orientation to net benefits. A's clash endless regression through picks and case first one see restart obviate predictability time constraint and coverage desire meet engagement. Secondary because dialogue to determine truth was not reciprocal so no constant rigor or intellectual rigor because the research practice cannot be explored and top education integrating forensic discussion to overcome knowledge gaps and interpersonal by centering curriculum problem solving skills and reliable and consistent managers exploitability because students can navigate simulated crime scenes and approach reflexivity in academic institution. That's the illus 7. Second mutual is the only holistic metric to value pain and pleasure. No other framework accounts for future trends agential capacity and playing with suffering and death is the only confirmed ontological state. Third the alt does not solve case state isn't fun fiat movement. 6 4 the perm do both this have the reps so we do too. 7 cycle is wrong it's not ontological and broader structures result in a contingent material situation Robinson during ontology refers to what we encounter the world as being never pressed by ontological and also relational the limit to the living linked to the simple actually mean what makes it regards to other breakers because for ontological reference including ontological actually exists which relation with people in the world they used to be constantly ontological the opposite relation with mutual relation in relation shifting never face races to that person ontology such as world making also be unmade can be resisted to process about how to be ontology should never usually face oppression the world and never fully commit to process as long as a dialogue pushing to apple because disease securitization is good and researching this play through planning is valuable is preemptive action the cooking evidence is starting early for preventing care less the public know but the reality disease prevents a private lease from making self-interest action in the event of anticipated disease turns okay because it creates beneficial discourse slows neoliberal control of healthcare and nation state the African approaches discourse to decenter militia control. The very cause of this was low disease priority because disease is complicated national security and power. C forensic errors anxiety is high now and third bioterror lack of preparedness magnify fear and cause mental health problems so students should be combined with information explosion learn how to move past leftist abstraction move towards scientific consideration discourage false targeting their drives arguments are non-falsifiable and don't exist Johnson but individual lens of approach to average for the fails discovers conflict between drive despite belief to assess but natures of interdetectives of liberating aspects of address able to act on the contrary to arresting conversation limited economy precise from has a chance for affliction exists such a weakness addressing crucifixion very sudden emergency something nothing good to be default to the economy single capacity autonomy humanity the first of enjoyment is not absolute the immigration decided the plan is bipartisan helps and security 20 DHS making $10 million able to help local groups effectively combat terrorism waste $10 million to produce separate range of troops that target evidence cars evidence about pursuit 20 appropriation activate DHS to expand the program the president has requested additional funds fiat means a plan passed without political ramification this is not intrinsic the this will be derailed by climate tax minimum wage hyperperson king 322 climate change minimum wage hyperperson derailed public multicultural by size so you are compromised by proposal stimulus sound like a for sure crash line $15 minimum wage PC is not ruled with Biden but 120 of the PC is not something that exists with the party polarized PC become meaningless no controversy Biden can draw no hedge impact and it causes more backlash Jefferson Chinese self-and brands argue that unmistakable cars invest military power diplomacy the economic senior power so raise the possibility of United States great power competition now will the associated corporation corporation block consider starting a property research for the United States to research power to international security likelihood of conflict mark the card at likelihood of conflict.
Okay, let me mark that. It was the first card.
Yeah, the Schifrinson card. And it's marked at increase their likelihood of conflict.
Got it. Okay. First theory.
Kondo process.
Okay. What's the countertip to condo?
Dispo.
Okay.
And it was like you can kick with perms and defense.
Got it. The argument on, I guess, the second advantage, which terrorist groups want to use chemical weapons right now?
Our evidence talks about non-state actors and state actors. For example, are you talking about bioterrorists in specific or like just chemical attacks?
The chemical attacks one. Like who's trying to chemical attack?
Our evidence talks about Iran, North Korea. The ORD evidence, it'll substantiate this claim that the Gander evidence is talking about, which is about like North Korea, Iran, and it talks about other non-state actors, like terrorists who already have access to these materials.
Sure. So those people
are most likely to have these
those
weapons.
people are presumably building their chemical weapons outside the United States, right? Like why would North Korea come here to build a chemical weapon? Can we agree about that?
Well, those are
Release it
state
here.
actors. There's also non-state actors who are
Okay,
rogue and would like
terrorists.
to launch
Like,
them against.
which
Also,
terrorists in the US
it's
are
impossible
building
to know which terrorist groups are building them now. They don't exactly publish that online. The point is
Yeah.
that it has become so easy to develop them that obviously there's going to be actors that are incentivized to, because they saw from COVID that all of these weapons have
I
tremendous
feel like
power.
it'd be a pretty shitty chemical weapon, but that's fine. The argument on the conditioning funding counterplan, I guess the Hayes evidence is about conditioning funds on like liberal things like policing reform. I guess we've heard evidence that the states wouldn't like the plan or like would try and get it struck down.
You're talking about the Haywood and Rice evidence?
Yeah, that evidence is like if we tried to condition cops funds on things
No,
like
well, I think you're misunderstanding the point of that evidence. It's just that the power of the purse is with the legislative branch.
no,
The
the evidence
counterplan
says
has the
power to
DHS
condition-
Act.
The evidence says that power to conditions funds is I guess weak in the sense that states could litigate if they
It
didn't
says,
like
quote,
conditions
the
on
power
funds.
of the purse, the power to wield the purse rests squarely with the legislative branch. The president cannot unilaterally add conditions. The counterplan would definitely get struck down because the president does not have the power. The counterplan is the
Strike down
executive
the
acting.
counterplan. Like the courts would strike down the counterplan.
I don't know.
And
It's
it
just
gives
like
an empirical
unconstitutional. Like,
example of when that happened.
it's an abuse of fiat too, probably, if you were just like, we're going to fiat through it.
I don't think so, but that's fine.
And we've also read like an impact to like separation of
Coercion.
powers and stuff too.
Where?
I think it was on the other executive counterplan. It was the one which was like, yeah, the buy like 20 card.
I'm trying to see where this is. Oh, sure. That's fine. The coercive funding deficit, I guess, well, actually, I'm gonna ask about the K. The argument about framework, like what's your interp? Do we not get links to representations? Do we get
You get links to our plan. So our plan consequences. We'd argue that our consequences are
What are
like
your
the best, like what the plan results in. So like if you would argue that the plan results in more bioterror, then that is a link to the plan's action because you have proven that we do not solve our plan and that we would lead to more net
So we have to
harm.
disprove solvency before we can weigh your plan?
We just think the consequences of our plan are the best test of our research that we've done before the round.
10 minutes starting now. Okay, and prep 315 remaining. I'll send it out. Okay, it's sent. The order is going to be the executive counterplan, or I think what's being called the DHS counterplan, then the funding conditions counterplan, or like the funding pick, then terror advantage, innovation advantage.
Sorry, give me 1 sec.
So which of the counterplans is first?
So the executive counterplan, like the DHS counterplan, and then the funding pick. The funding counterplan.
So the multi-plane one is first.
Yeah.
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 I can go look at what they were called in the one and see if that's helpful, or do you know what I mean?
That's not that's not the DHS specific one. That's like the convene federal agencies one.
Yeah.
That's coming first.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
sure. Yeah. Okay, is everyone good?
I still need to pull up the cards. I'll let you know when I do.
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. The counterplan solves the out. The OSTP and executive agency can develop a national forensic strategy, ensure compliance, and allocate funding viewed through the lens of sufficiency framing. Any 2AC solvency deficit has to outweigh the impact of the net benefit in judging the counterplan. If there's a risk that it links executive strategy, solve identification of forensic capability gaps, especially true for microbial research and bioforensics. That's GAO 17. DHS, SDI, FBI, OSTP involved in identifying bioforensic capability needs to improve the bioforensic to investigate suspected operations to provide evidence of sufficient quality to support responses, legal proceedings, development of government policies, and focus U.S. government research efforts to advance the discipline, review and update capability needs, information, help inform efforts to identify capability needs, prioritize gaps, executive solicitation solves R&D. GAO 17. DHS collected and funded R&D projects to enhance bioforensic capabilities in which DHS has stated that there are capability gaps. VAs specify the broad topic areas, those less technical topic areas, awarded contracts for solution of products addressing areas of the areas related to bioforensics is involved in the process from start to finish. There's no funding deficit. One is sufficiency. They have the impact of funding is marginal if we win case defense because it answers all every funding key warrant, and they don't have any evidence that quantifies how much money is needed. A few executive agencies the counterplan withdraw money from. A. Current policing grants. The counterplan recalls all 192 million DOJ grants awarded to states and reappropriates them to meet the counterplan's mandates. That's the 40-year evidence. B. The DOJ gets a few $100 million annually to allocate to state forensic labs that comply with federal initiatives. The counterplan allocates that funding. OJP 20. Since 2004, the OJP received an annual appropriation for forensic science activities. The funding is administered through supports laboratory capability, capacity enhancement of forensic science research that provides ability to improve quality forensic science. The Satumo card says that Congress appropriates for extremely general purposes like national security, which means that there's room for the executive to shift that money around. The stiff evidence is referring to dipping into private funds like campaign donations, not about moving money around that has already been publicly allocated to a broad general purpose that the executive has discretion about which specific agency it goes to. The BILAC evidence that just says that Congress has a general oversight role, but the counterplan would operate within that. Also, empirics, the DOJ can give grants to labs that meet compliance measures. DOJ 20 U.S. Attorney announced 1-2 and DOJ grants to San Diego agencies to fund crime laboratories, board forensic science, and grants part of 192 million in funding. The NIJ, who gives annual grants to forensic lab based on compliance. NIJ awards grant for cooperative agreements for various research development and evaluation projects, releases competitive solicitations calling for research development, testing, and evaluation. Focus on solicitations varies from year to year based on research priorities and available funding. Third, the first one, EC card says consistent funding is helpful. They can't see out that Congress agrees to maintain a set level of funding. There's also no impact to lack of funding, and the other rehighlighting answers don't answer it. Also, if it's just about the signal of consistent federal support, then any amount of money trickling into those agencies, even if it's insufficient, or even if they win that some of these roads to funding would fail, is still sufficient to create that signal so that those agencies feel supported. NSTC is about sustained investment and research by the DHS. It doesn't say that more money is needed. We're yellow at NSTC 09. NBFAC within DHS is not solely focused on R&D, requires sustained investment in multidisciplinary basic research, focused technology, and robust method validation. Good is then also said, okay, I'll go to the primitive vote debate. It fails one. It links in a benefit. Congress will still have to get involved, which requires the use of a reconciliation slot. Second, no shielding arguments based off sequencing. Both happen at the same time, which magnifies the link because the plan looks like activism. Third, sufficiency matters. If reasons not to do the counterplan are unclear, there's only risk that the absent opportunity cost with the counterplan. The perm to the counterplan answers. I'll do a lot of that. I'll do a lot of that on the other flow. The links to agenda are the links to the agenda. Argument one is not what our just had is about because it's about the use of a particular budget reconciliation slot, not about general other agenda items. And second, it's generic retaliation, which doesn't reduce the solvency of the counterplan or the ambiguity stuff is about informing judicial guidelines, not about the general solvency of the counterplan. The separation of powers argument. No, they need to read evidence that the court would strike it down, not that the court could strike it down. They don't have a spillover argument about broader separation of powers that's tied to funding because their evidence is about the executive increasing funds writ large, i.e. taking money out of the treasury, not using pre-existing funds. And their evidence says absent congressional authorization, those grants can't be conditioned, but forensic science grants are already conditioned now, and durable fiat solves it. We obviously get to fiat implementation, and the counterplan is upheld in the court, or every app would lose because the court is conservative, which means that they would just strike down those. So it's only reciprocal. Yeah, go to the funding type. The app gets a FedQ warrant by making forensic science departments flush with cash. The cost of that is that it forgoes the opportunity to squeeze the executive and cause inter-executive reallocation. The counterplan opts for the latter. It draws funding away from border militarization to fund the forensic analysis, which renders Border Patrol broken, unable to kill thousands via depleting deserts of water, deposits, and supplies, shooting at people, etc., which garners all the same offense as the affirmative. Dismiss any minor risk of its policy deficit in light of the substantial net benefit of solving violence towards undocumented migrants. The doesn't solve cooperative federalism argument. There's no evidence to that effect that it would be coercive. The funding is just given to those agencies all the same, but taken from the DHS. There aren't any extra conditions that are imposed on it. It's a product of the counterplan. The prim do both argument. Both are about specific block grants versus categorical. I already did that above. The funding is generic enough. It's just for national security, which means that the executive gets to choose what specific agencies that's going to, and isn't locked to one or the other. I'll do the prim to the counterplan debate. Prim to the counterplan is severance. One, functional. The app has several cards that indicate their Congress in order to garner their funding advantages. Demonstrates functional distinctions, which is where they get their ground. Second is textually enact as legislative. Jaffe et al. 2000. Enact corroborates only legislative action. Laws are enacted, whereas regulations are adopted. Common usage of the word enact is creating a law. Administrative entities are said to adopt regulations. Law in the meaning of the legislative enactment does not include administrative. The Supreme Court agrees. Scalia 2. Court's redistricting plan was not enacted by the state of Mississippi. An enactment is the product of legislation, not adjudication. So to lower courts, our evidence is comparative. Court of Appeals in Maryland. 2K enact corroborates only legislative action. Laws are enacted. Regulations are adopted. See Black's Law. Nobody's heard to say that the EPA enacted a law. It's a pig. Courts alone or less than the federal government. Miller 86 is the U.S. single entity encompassing the government, and one artificial being the government in the U.S. is not only any one branch, and each branch is part of an indivisible whole, and less than the, which denotes a holistic function. Webster's 5 uses of function indicate a reference to the group as a whole. Severance is a voter. Anything else that's asking claim the Vegas plan text, and then also garner agent-related advantages with no consequence to that choice. That's a voter for clash and fairness. Their term makes it impossible to be negative. Letting the app be the executive massively exposed to topic. They can make minuscule administrative changes or pardon individuals, and no link out of every court disad. Theory is a benefit to our interpretation. Debates about why agent counterplans are good are reasons that we get the executive because it forces them to consider the political trade-offs that are most realistic to real-world policymaking. Cross-apply that to the prim to the counterplan. On the other counterplan, the links in that benefit argument says that Congress can impose conditions on appropriation, but it's not predictive evidence that those conditions would come and that those conditions are coming down the pike, or that they would be related to the implementation of the counterplan. That doesn't solve federal funding argument was above, and you can cross-apply the slush funds argument from the other flow. Also, the pensions argument is not key to current solvency. It's just about future employees being taken care of in their retirement, which might be nice, but it's not integral to the solvency of the internal links, which is only about the efforts that are currently being made by those industries. The process counterplans, it's not a process counterplan. If the process refers to literally the actions of any agency, then all counterplans are eliminated from debate. Agent counterplans are good. Competition checks abuse. The fact that the counterplan is net beneficial proves that the agent of the enactment is an important part of the plan. Best policy option. Many times the best policy option comes from a different area of the government enacting the plan. Finding the best policy is key to education. The affirmative is responsible for its agent. The affirmative has lots of time to think about every part of the plan. They should be responsible for picking the best agent possible. Agent counterplans are key to leveling the playing field. The affirmative is able to claim advantages from whatever agent they choose. The negative should be able to test that by running a counterplan. Their key limit on the topic. On a topic this big, agent counterplans are necessary to limit the number of valuable affirmatives and to give the negative generic strategies to combat the large number of cases. And they're also critical to education and solvency. I'll skip that card. Go to the terror advantage. No bioterror, that's Blum and Nguyen. 1, pathogenic viruses are impossible to find, isolate, and spread. No viruses on the CDC's prevention list can be weaponized. Plagues can be isolated, and anthrax, the most likely option, isn't contagious. Second, terror is lack of stable environment and scientific expertise to isolate and disseminate viruses. Third, it's historically failed. Groups have tried numerous times, and the only casualties that the hamster virus was tested on. Fourth, COVID doesn't make it more likely. It wasn't lab engineered and can't be replicated. Fifth, plytropy and genetic instability, doom engineering. Jefferson et al. 14. Researchers not actually designed the pathogens. Results were unanticipated. Lessons of a Soviet program were trade-offs between characteristics like ABR, but the losses by Ruin's programs have pleiotropic effects on the lack of stability, exhibiting lesser yields, genetic instability are common. It's just not possible. That's Pinker. 18. The evolution of germs will frustrate the terrorists. A germ would require expensive linking that terrorists are unlikely to carry out advances in biotech, make it easier to identify pathogen dependent antibiotics that overcome ABR and develop rapid vaccines. Journalistic habits and negativity bias inflate the odds and cross-apply all this defense to the second advantage. The warrants are true chemical text. 2. Go to the innovation advantage. no chemical tax, non-state actors are answered by the defense on the first advantage, and North Korea wouldn't build a chemical weapon here. We can't extradite them, which means that which means that even if we caught them, we couldn't do anything. Got check. All of their evidence is about the attribution of crimes after they've already occurred. That might be nice vengeance for the victims and their family, but it doesn't actually prevent the crime from taking place in the first place, which means it's not an internal link to solving their impact. No impact to drones. Finding their drone doesn't mean that we can find who owns it, extradite them, and there's already broad international efforts to stop drones now. That was the 1C evidence, and they don't have evidence that those deterring efforts will be effective. Also, there's no evidence that the law enforcement technologies will be exported to the military.
We're gonna run some prep before Crossix starts. I'm gonna call a look.
Just let us know when this runs. Oh, I didn't send out those 2 cards on case, I don't think, so I'll send them now. We can do that before we start prep if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I sent them, my bad.
All right, starting.
We stopped. I'll look. Do you have the time?
Yeah, 8:21.
You good for Crossix, Colin?
Yeah.
Okay. The pick about restructuring, I'm confused about what the counterplan does. Does it like reduce funding? How does it restructure? Because like your plan text does not say we reduce funding whatsoever in the counterplan text.
Sure.
So like how does it restructure it?
It's about taking funding from the DHS current border militarization efforts and reappropriating it for use in the forensic labs and forensic science, like swabs and swatches and things like that.
So
All
why
the
can't
stuff
you
that the
just
app
do
is talking
both?
about.
Why can't you have Congress do it and then that solves the internal?
Sure.
Or are you not going for the internal about border militarization?
No, that is the argument. Is that
So
in order to reduce
then
border
why can't you just do
militarization-
both? Like reduce funding.
Right.
They have even more funding than the AF provides because the counterplan also provides some too.
No, because the issue is that if you
Counterplan makes
provide
the
the
DHS
funding,
The
it
kind
doesn't.
DHS restructure its existing budget. The plan gives more money, which means there's no budget trade-off.
You have not read a single card that says that the affirmative has to reduce or increase
Yeah,
funding.
it is.
or
The
change-
first
You read
card-
a slew of cards to answer this counterplan about why increasing congressional funding is good. It is too late for you to walk back on that.
Wait, I'm not going back on that. I'm not talking about do the counterplan. I'm talking about do both. The
Right.
AF increases
If you
funding
increase the
through a
funding-
congressional action. Wait, I want to make this clear. The AF increases funding through a congressional action. The counterplan restructures whatever the hell it does, and it gives funding for and it takes it away from border militarization. What about that? is
Only takes
severant
it
of
away from
anything
border.
the AF has said?
Okay, do you want me to answer the question? It
Yeah, go
only
ahead.
takes it away from border militarization out of fiscal necessity because there is an inherent trade-off where the executive doesn't have sufficient funds to fund both efforts, and so it has to take it away from border and give it to
Oh,
the
that is
forensic
just
science
so
initiatives.
contrived.
No, it isn't. That's all what the 1NC evidence substantiates, and that's
You're-
what the pick's been from the get-go. If you
You're-
fund it, they're flush with cash, and that trade-off doesn't exist, which means no funds are sapped from the border militarization efforts, and they keep killing people with the BPS.
The
Okay,
counterplan
this
text
wheel
that-
evidence?
You're explaining perm to both as if the counterplan text fiats a reduction in funding for border patrol, which the counterplan
Right.
text does not.
No,
do.
I know. It just says restructure, but that was my point. The wheel evidence about executive reappropriation is about Trump, and it said that he violated
spell
this
wheel?
ICA. Sorry? Oh, yeah,
Can you spell wheel?
WEHLE.
Okay.
This card is just about how Trump violated this ICA. Where do you have a piece of evidence that says that the executive can just?
I don't think I
repeatedly
read the
violate-
wheel evidence.
Okay, so what piece of evidence have you read then that says the objections are unenforceable? Did you read the Cochrane evidence?
What do you mean the objections are unenforceable? Your
What
argument about how
evidence do you
Congress
have
can,
that says that the executive can always increase funding and that Congress will just do absolutely nothing about it?
So I read a litany of funding arguments. You don't have predictive evidence that in response to any one of them, Congress would implement these restrictions. Your card about that is just at the beginning of the fiscal year, when Congress lays out money, it can impose conditions on where it wants the money to go and under what conditions. Sure, obviously Congress has that constitutional ability, but that's not.
Does the
evidence that
counterplan
they'll make
increase
use
the
of it.
amount of money in current grants, or does it increase the grant?
It doesn't do either.
Neither.
It just
So then where does it get the money from? Is there already money in the
So-
grants that is just not going to the states?
we've read
So-
evidence. And the truancy that gives it, so the federal government every year funds and conditions funding to forensic science labs that it really loves, right? The counterplan has that money be restructured. There are already compliance incentives. There are already conditions. The government decides how they give the money. The counterplan just changes the way in the algorithm that we use to give the money. There are already conditions.
Oh, look, do you need prep or are you good? You good? Okay.
Okay. The order is the executive multi-plank counterplan, the K, and then the reconciliation disab. Oh. What a disaster. Okay, wait. I'm just answering the strike down argument and then condo on the executive counterplan for clarity. Okay, is anyone not good?
Give me 1 sec. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. The separation of powers argument, I think you have the court strike it down, that the court could strike it down. They also don't have a split argument, a broader separation of powers that's defending because their evidence is about the executive increasing funds or large, i.e. taking more money out of the treasury, not using pre-existing funds or evidence as an absent congressional authorization grants can't be conditioned, but forensic science grants are already conditioned now. Those are the cards that Conrad and also durable field solves. So we advocate to be implementation of the kind of that's upheld in the court or every absolute because the court's conservative by distance and a broader precedent because it's only this one instance. Conrad, we get the number of that we remember we can't kind of straight to a distance. We don't get to see kind of plans first stack black pharmacy recency by sector T5 study plans to receive repayment if it add-ons and fed key after no defense status quo schemes and deck reserve considered to compete second teacher so advocacy I also converse arguments for the defend political market second third foster argument innovation debaters and risk averse and conditionalized keys has different options to pursue issues strategies also our offense for and neg the advocacy of prep practice we are theory self had 1 to 5 speech time trade off topics really hard for the next distance or cataclysmic bad people have learned to impact on politics we need age kind of test against the every absa good idea 5 no excuse not because distance and speeds procedural to an hour to ourselves there's no contradictions they help the effort and when it's is consistent is a vote is not a voting issue cause substantive credit just though is bad encourages you have the same backing best arguments is to see add-ons means never testing for this myself bias also some their offense so we knows it means it causes process counterpoint debates internal links or clash offense or people just smash counterpoints together to force perms which has the same effect that K can see the perma not going for it has the competition the overview they beef this dissent and tweets would you choose not let any new any arguments you made because that's already I'm choosing to extend and strike them off and fill down to get 2 reconciliation items for fiscal year 1 resolution and an amendment means they use 4 times for midterms COVID took 1 infrastructure takes 1 a care economy infrastructure bill takes some ways there's only 1 less slot left which could use for immigration now but the plan goes through reconciliation which means it replaces the immigration bill nukes military readiness it builds key to recruitment cause great power that outweighs in terms case first instability cause great power profit that vacuums have laterals to increase recruitment second obviously turning to a second advantage because there are other the internal link is about the military findings sub democrats have 3 slots out before midterms that's 2 charging for instead of McDonough up in the new path of Mr. Second capacity reconciliation bills for doubling opportunity to choose the sub democrats for so it's possible for the reconciliation bill for the 2 democrats party use 1 of the 4 things so the infrastructure they use is possible democracy passive reconciliation bill immigration specifically the dream act 2 of those slots go to infrastructure that leaves just 1 bill for either the one or immigration form that's the first and 4 A plus E path 1 has with the pitch split infrastructure 2 back to 1 episode tables assets with the human infrastructure that White House believes the breaking up maintain the way to stop policy using the plans to keep the proposal separate but reconciliation bill allow the Democrats to avoid the filibuster budget chairman Sanders expect reconciliation to be deployed they say normal means our interpretation that normal means is the minimal and is a minimal possible for the plans to get money that's budget reconciliation 50 the filibuster bill new card 60 minimum senators were reconciliation bill on the course 50 with 51 senators instead of parliamentary preferred first parliament 50 but the minimal means there's a clear standard for how the plan happens and establishes predictable links to distance and prevents aspects by links by referencing obscure lines and solvency advocate ground and skiddy distance grounded impact and backlash you need by partisanship other interests last leverage additional attitude of against the politics is that they say plans have budgetary framing issue if we win the minimal means made it means they need to win that the plan cannot be enacted through reconciliation not that it would not be enacted through reconciliation. In essence, they need to win that the parliamentarian would be legally incapable of allowing the plan to pass the reconciliation. The plan increases funding, and they've heavily defended that, which means normal means is anything concerning the budget goes to reconciliation. The plan's not bipartisan. Their evidence is a year old about DHS funding. It does not make the argument that the plan could not and would not pass the reconciliation, which means our partisanship stuff. And this is never, which means it definitely goes to reconciliation. CGR can pass reconciliation. That's where in all. Which would see becomes just reform the next year's reconciliation. Arizona did that. Track Bill 220. SB 1683 case said the crusade better reconciliation where prisons related to criminal justice bills that change something spending levels with the reconciliation. That's got 21 reckon. The Senate passed reconciliation laws of things reconciliation must change federal funding or federal revenue. There's only one career area in the policy budgetary impact and set up a Senate parliamentarian thinks it makes the final distinction. You can speak number evidence is about things that don't go through reconciliation, which means it doesn't thump our decide because it's not about PC. It also answers there no Biden PC argument. Democrats will pass immigration bill through reconciliation. That's the simple evidence. She says 5 different top Democrats who all committed to a strong immigration push, including the co-sponsor of Biden's immigration bill and the chair of the relevant Senate committee. All it's a consensus choice for Democrats leaves reconciliation. Senate parliamentarian ruling gives Democrats the opportunity. This question and take us for 6 tops and Democrat officials form Democrats that change to use complex budget for the parliamentarian's option. We're hoping the more we have reconciliation new funding with the weekly versus the more for some of the most ambitious and diverse laws to break down biases to part infrastructure plan activists urged to use reconciliation for assistance different Democrats will use it now. That's what's good for 17 has special option for advancing priorities passed on administration parliamentarians options campaign for immigration parliamentarians willing opportunities on immigration overhaul propositions. They also do not make an argument that immigration does not pass the reconciliation. So no new arguments. They don't get hedged bad. Our term link is military readiness. We haven't got a card that's key to broader hedge, and they marked the 2AC card way too early with no warrant for why it causes escalation. It's just an author ended of a card that we didn't read. Draw the line because I extended this disad because they marked the card way too early. Germany solves extinction that's finding 17 Russia or these says over 10 more superior loops uses not subject this as all applies to all system looks just reduces his influence role only in future conflict Russia what dominates for forward some space China government East Asia Indian South Asia Middle East work media however between Saudi Arabia and Iran space influence sharp power coverage regional hegemony between word of global contestation China open like future challenge United States for American power retreats and encourage regional powers to solve their own problems they were hot reserve allies confidence in the United States series influence will leave weaker states become the victims of stronger more aggressive ones variable American military work guarantees and bold American adversaries and South six others that undercut American security security is interest in the United States may do okay as we don't as a fossil tar such transition leading kind of hot wars in the United States post as a regional domination U.S. treachery causes extinction that's all forth the production of post-milk and milk trade killing us from the assumption that security was for the boarding so you should cross the social balance undermines the assumption that states have preferences for status even states are secure and engaged in high competitive and the behavior empirical status of the retrenchment result in deterioration of security and everyone in the world's key region with the all will yield competitive multipolarity. Mark the card at polarity. Do you need a mark stock? Mitty, do you need a mark doc? Okay.
I'm calling all oak and then we'll start prep. We used 540, so we have 240.
Yeah, that's what I have.
I'm sending a doc, by the way.
Okay, the order is the bioterror advantage, the innovation advantage, the executive multi-plane counterplan, the DHS restructuring counterplan, then the politics dissent.
Sorry, can you give that one more time?
Yeah, bioterror advantage, innovation advantage, executive multi-plane counterplan, DHS restructuring counterplan, politics dissent.
I'm here and I'm good.
The risk of future extinction from disease is at least 50% because all of their impact events ignores future technologies. The Jefferson evidence is so old from 2014 and it's referencing the Soviet program and progress from the early 2000s. Thorson and Miller are so much more recent. The newest gene tech makes it much easier. The bigger evidence concludes advocates says that advances in biology make it easier for the tech to happen, and then says that we need to develop our tech in order to respond. No answer to all of the solvency arguments. In the first advantage gives a very high risk. The second advantage, not going for the terminal impact, but I will send the fusion center internal link and link scenario, which they have no game on. Inspector General and Wilson evidence that forensic science in the military are tied up. Low fusion centers are slowing us down. It's highly specific about the need to improve our forensic. From the science research, the executive counterplan first. At the top, the 2NC literally makes up the line by line between this counterplan and the other counterplan. So you should have a very high threshold for 1 AR drops and a very low threshold for any of the 2NC arguments because it was literally impossible to draw connections between them since they were mixing up line by line. They massively screwed up the add-on on the other page, which applies equally to both of the counterplans, and they totally messed it up. They conceded the evidence about destroying public expenditures as a result of the counterplan, and then they conceded the executive having unilateral authority will lead to worse X's. That was the political evidence, specifically the power of the person is key to the rule of law, separation of power. Hitler and Gowdy in 20 Congress, these acting effect the counterweight. The American system of checks and balances power is the foremost of powers that Congress must begin using more aggressive has another pronoun. Additional is the power of the person. The free rise to the branch of the government close to the wall. Other people hit the relevant. Needs to be truly effective. Use more often the Congress system institute would act legislative of order preserve and separation of powers and judgment, which all the Congress should have the means to deliver on the will of the people. Congressional rechanneling of funding acts and effective check on the executive reinvigorate congressional power of the first price. And 18 a run appropriation statute mandates violation be prerogative that it be investigated type of violation. Congress has exercised its authority towards one area eliminated there is essential maintaining congressional denial of resources and funds provided to crucial and extract is more important given the power of persons have required and is already unhinged henchman. That is specifically true in the context of law enforcement appropriations, which the counterplan completely tears apart. Price in 18 law enforcement area near plenary congressional control resource dependent not to take care of the lobby not to execute the laws holds authority and authorities enact laws so missing actually weakens Congress' ability of the person dependent makes it a productive tension while our projects bring appropriation are part of the law would remove the most important constraint executive authority monitor over law enforcement controls, congressional guidance and oversight solves misguided policies, accidents that go new or could have. In 18 oversight the process, so Congress acts to watch out over money, oversight includes policy guidance, treaty of implementation, circuit address target, oversight, fully across national security, there's sloppy implementation of by military nuclear action or unnecessary engagement, Vietnam torture, stereotype provided to terrorist attacks where as the current have been distraction corruption, causing conflict, runaway spending, intelligence failure, Russia, and China eager to fill the right, dangerously turns the disadvantage, waxman and 14 stronger, legislative checks to improve deterrent and coercion, when making them selective and credible. Congress reflects strong willingness to bear the cost of war and they can threaten procedure there's a popular use of force in which evaluate undermine future will also among those who depend on use for security and maintenance of the world order. They power the person is key to the rule of law and separation of powers, but the permutation to both was also not handled correctly. It would obviously create momentum if the executive and the Congress were acting on something at the same time, which means it wouldn't necessarily go through reconciliation. It could go through the normal process because now there's now momentum for the conditionality debate. It's bad. Our insurers arbitrary increase incentive for avoidance the race to the bottom. One, strategy outweighs Netflix ideology logical contradictions between teams can't straight turn K because of an all report offense on opposing ideas, which makes defending both sides impossible and boosts incentive for coding strategy. Second, Dispo solves 2Cs always do their best, but this was reserved straight turn to punish bad strat and save 1 hour time. The Altus new 2 and C counterplans that destroy incentive for bold choices. Innovation internal is a repeat, but they make debate painfully easy without strat choices. Teams chase ink, so Dispo makes strategy and argument interaction a burden for both sides. Air F is reciprocal. The F is one uncondo plan. The negative block ESR rules the day, even if skews and will counterplans have unpredictable net benefits and re-encourage units in the 2 is not so right. There's no reason the counterplan should be treated like a diss. Reject the team abuse. Story skews round strategy. They cost substance current first, and being neg doesn't mean you get to become a condo terrorist. For example, the DHS counterplan. This counterplan is just non-competitive, and I dare them to go for it. The counterplan has the executive take money out of the DHS, give it to a certain initiative. The app has Congress do the net benefit. It's about border militarization. Perm do both solves. Congress would fund, executive would fund, and terminal defense of border militarization because the executive would just restructure DHS, or you could just do the app and permit not playing no terminal impact extended to border militarization or internal link between border militarization and broader debt. So the app definitely outweighs both counterplans massively linked to net benefit, both this and the other one, by causing fights and waiving congressional input over budget decisions. Their cards about Trump. Think about how Republicans would respond to a Democratic president's administration upsetting the power of the first, who would go ballistic. Links on a sliding scale or arbitration. You should reject the politics advantage. The case solves the disadvantage. The second advantage, internal link, obviously boosts military readiness, since they had no game on the internal link itself. Normal means being to going to reconciliation is a terrible interpretation for fiat. It's better to see that there are political ramifications. It said is not an intrinsic op cost, so their interpretation makes it impossible to go app hypotheticals about what the plan would look like. It's not predictable. Their trip is not predictable because zero cards say that funding Homeland Security would go through reconciliation, so it's a bastardization of the literature. Our interpretation solves ground because you could say other things. So for counterplans and dissent, they say Homeland Security bad. It's a because links to the creed, etc. The burden on proof is on them for the link. They have to prove that the plan would go through reconciliation because that is a unique factor that's only been applied for seamless which the thumpers still apply in this case, even though they just blew them off and saying that they're not about reconciliation because it's about getting enough Congress people on the board, which unique evidence is only 5 people and 1 aide right now, which is such a low amount that the risk of the dissent cannot be very high.
All right. We have 3:15 starting now.
What was the thing that you conceded on the second advantage?
Chemical attacks impact defense.
Chemical attacks. Okay.
Okay. Do we have all of Mitty? Okay. The order is going to be the reconciliation disad, the multi-plane counterplan, funding pick, terror advantage, and then the innovation advantage.
Is there a doc?
No. Okay. Everyone good? Military readiness outweighs in terms of case. There was no impact. Defense and revisionist powers are coming now. Military readiness is the only way to stop global catastrophic conflict, which outweighs the amount of time that it takes for somebody to use a drone, which means that we don't need to win case defense. One, turns terrorism. Their internal link evidence is about instability broadly, which our impact obviously exacerbates because in the midst of states fighting, there's less infrastructure to check against terrorist attacks. Second, turns the impact to second advantage, but they can't solve ours because our internal link is about a shortage of personnel, which means that even if the app's health forensic capabilities, it terminally cannot overcome shortage, which means that there's no personnel to solve the drones. The app also doesn't create a congressional challenge that overrides congressional power of the purse because they haven't read evidence that the executive branch is usurping funding capabilities now, which means that their evidence is an intrinsic offense to the app. I'll reiterate that on the counterplan, but it means that there's no game against the disad with weighing that. No impact on separation of power. Their evidence says it's a good thing, not that it's necessary. They also don't solve military readiness. It's about using forensic science to find drones, not boots on the ground or in other countries. No new 1AR extrapolation on the disad. Draw the line from the 2AC and don't let them get any new warrants. They completely messed up the disad, which is why we made the strategic choice to extend it and not the critique. Late-breaking debates unfairly favor the app, but we have been consistent about the disad the whole round, which means there's no justification for anything being new. The only fiat insert made in the 2NC was that fiat solves the link, meaning immediate passage, which does not get them out of the link to the disad because it isn't predicated off of immediacy, but rather that the plan passes through reconciliation, which takes up the last slots that Democrats have and trades off of their ability to pass immigration reform, which is happening now and will be done through reconciliation. The 2AC evidence doesn't say a word on immigration, which means that subpar cards are better than no cards at all. The 1NC evidence, the Tankersley evidence, and the Mascaro evidence all say that top Democrats and lobbying groups are pushing hard for immigration to go through reconciliation now. And absent them having a card that says it won't happen, tech over truth means that you go neg. Yes, they go through reconciliation. The 1AR assertion had no warrant. Yes, it's predictable. It's normal means. They conceded they need to win, that it doesn't go through reconciliation. They conceded that funding issues go through reconciliation normally. The 1AR warrants were entirely new. Our interpretation is that normal means is the minimal possible means for the plan to be implemented, which is budget reconciliation. A filibuster-proof bill would require a minimum of 60 senators, whereas a reconciliation vote only requires 50, and then Kamala Harris to break the tie and the Senate parliamentarian to approve it, which is obviously how things are getting done nowadays because congressional Republicans are being recalcitrant, which means that this is not just an obscure method that was used for the stimulus bill, but is what Biden is planning to use for the other bills. Prefer it. One, bright line and predictability. Minimal means sets a clear standard for how the plan happens that establishes predictable links to the disad and prevents the apps from spiking out of links by referencing obscure lines in the solvency advocate. Second is ground. It's key to disads grounded in backlash, unity, and bipartisanship. Other interpretations allow the app to leverage attitude and fiat against politics. Disad stumpers are about specific issues going through bipartisanship, but Republicans aren't needed to pass immigration reform, which means that those defections don't matter, which is what their thumpers are about. They need to read evidence that says it implicates the ability to pass immigration through reconciliation. Draw a line. There are no new 1AR or 2AR arguments. Winning the app as bipartisan isn't an answer to the link because our interpretation is the least possible means, and I don't have a 3R to answer all the news, just to answer any of the new 2AR arguments. So all of this, so hold the line. Go to the multi-plane counterplan. Framing issue. Their counter-interpretation can't solve any of their offense because people can just read unlimited dispo and they can just read unlimited dispositionality, and people can just read a ton of counterplans that have shitty net benefits to force you to read a permutation, which means that they can later kick them. We get our counter-interpretation is that we get the number of counter that we read, but we can't counterplan out of straight turn disads, and we don't get 2NC counterplans, which solves the offense in the 1AR about why counterplans are bad. They're good. One, neg flex. The neg is literally drowning in apps on the topic, and every 2A has done astronomically more research on the app than the neg could ever hope to do for one case neg. Eliminating condo means they get to abuse what is already an advantage in literature familiarity to do creative 2AC tricks and reframings that garner offense against a counterplan that we're stuck with, which eliminates the incentive for any neg research and prevents us from being able to compare and analyze differing policies because the strategic cost of introducing a counterplan becomes just too high. The race to the ideological contradiction argument. You aren't going to say that settler colonialism is good, so it doesn't matter since you always introduce a perm anyway. Their disposition anality counter-interpretation can't solve the pad strategies argument. If we go for it, then you get all of that offense because we said that we wouldn't counterplan out of we wouldn't counterplan out of it. The unpredictable net benefits argument is the same is true if we just read the disad. The second, it teaches nuanced political advocacy. Ideologically diverse arguments force the app to defend the political middle ground. It also fosters argument innovation because debaters are risk averse and conditionality is key to different option. Improves 2AC efficiency and strategy, which solves our offense, which is amplified by the effects of the wiki, which enable the new research to proliferate and enhance the community knowledge. Air neg, the app gets infinite prep and reactive to ER. Theory itself is a 1-to-5 speech time trade-off, and I'm spending a lot of the 2 and R defending it, which means that condo is key to level the playing field. No skews are inevitable because it decides speeds, procedurals, etc. No contradictions. They help the app. And our 1C was consistent as an even if statement. It's not a voting issue. It causes substance crown. The point of being neg is to make it hard for the app. They had no warrant for why you should reject the team to make the infinite number of things that make debate harder. It's not resolutional theory, which means that it isn't predictable, and we shouldn't be held to account for it. Go to the terror advantage. no bioterror. Pathogenic viruses are impossible to find, isolate, and spread, and there's no viruses on the CDC prevention list that can't be weaponized. Plagues can be isolated, and anthrax most likely option isn't contagious, which means that even if there's been advances in biological technology, terrorists aren't able to get their hands on that because they're a bunch of ragtag rebels that don't have that kind of infrastructure, and those are all structural factors that would decrease the ability for them to use those in the first place. It's also historically failed. They've tried a number of times, which means that they're not incentivized to do it. Go to the other advantage, and you can cross-apply this. Them extending the internal link doesn't get them anywhere because all the domestic law enforcement capabilities are just about finding the diseases and being able to prosecute people after the fact, not about preventing them in the first place. All of that technology is completely irrelevant to foreign military operations abroad, which means there's no chance that it interacts with a disadvantage because the military isn't going to use disease isolation. They're going to use things like IED prevention.
Okay, I'm calling a Logan starting prep. Is everyone good for an order? Okay, the order is going to be the biotier advantage, the executive counterplan, like wherever you put the add-on, and then the decide. Okay, everyone's good to go? Not going for either counterplan was the biggest mistake in this debate because the affirmative and the add-on definitely outweigh the full weight of the disadvantage. Extinction from future engineering pathogens matters most. One is scope. I did not hear the two in our say the words extinction on the decide page, but we have 3 cards that say extinction for the advantage. Specifically, the middle evidence says that the risk is at least 50% drop. This means that the categorical preference for AF offense extinction is irreversible, and you have to factor in future generations, which brings our impacts to trillions of lives. 2 is probability. Think about all the intervening actors for military readiness. Tons of other things matters more, but The incoming bioterror can only be stopped by having robust disease preparedness, but this will matter less because we're the only ones with an external impact that they have no actual defense to, which I'll explain on the add-on. Their impact defense in the Twin R is really garbage. Yes, pathogenic viruses. Millet says that technology makes it easier for even biohacking communities to do it. It doesn't require expertise because costs are falling so low. It's also reverse causal because it says that diagnostics and surveillance reduce it by, quote, orders of magnitude. This card is so rhetorically powerful. Anthrax is obviously not going to cause extinction, but future pandemics will. Spread is possible. Larson evidence says it talks about megacities, warming, biodiversity loss, demographics, all concede warrants. Yes, terrorists, the cost and required expertise is so low. Independently, they drop the state actor scenario. Or it says people like NOCO in Iran and Russia have labs and necessary expertise, and all of those were warrants in the 1AR and 2NR. Spent 20 seconds in total because they were so scared we were going to go for condo. The innovation page, they messed this up. Our Inspector General and Wilson evidence is about military innovation. This turns the impact to the disadvantage because it means that we lack the necessary R&D to be able to solve emerging threats like other revisionist powers who we need to target for their own evidence. The executive counterplan, the bloc made a very big mistake extending a counterplan with a very messy story and no response to upsetting public expenditure. I know the 1AR overloaded on cards, but it's impossible for them to win when they just messed up on this add-on. They did not concede any defense. I don't even think they said the word add-on, and they didn't even have any defense to get out of it.
Mohol, could you stop 1 second? I lost about the last 15 seconds.
Yeah, for sure.
You were at 1:30 and you were talking about how the block made a mistake on the counterplan.
Oh yeah, okay. Let me just reset my timer then.
So 330 remaining, right? Like 130 used.
Correct.
Okay.
Are you good now? They extended a counterplan with a very messy story and no response to upsetting public expenditure. I know we overloaded on cards but it's because they didn't concede any defense or even attempt to get out of the add-on. I didn't even think Colin said the words empower the purse or anything of the sort. They've conceded uniqueness claim. A is that presidents like Trump have continuously violated the ICA and other bills, which is their own evidence they read in the 2NC to upset the power of the purse. And B, Biden is not immune. His VP record on NOCO was horrific and he massively increases the risk of nuclear catastrophe. That's like a little lofty evidence from the 1AR. C is the Gwenev card. It proves that oversight is waning right now. This has led to military casualties, nuclear accidents, unnecessary engagement, torture, slow stove-typing, and also inconsistency. They didn't even kick out of this counterplan properly, and it has a hedge impact that is literally the only offense they're going for. We only need to win a risk of uniqueness. We definitely solved the internal link to the add-on, and they've conceded on a truth level. First is the 2AC Stith evidence that says that the executive control disrupts the entire public expenditure, and any risk of uniqueness means that the AF increases oversight because it has Congress channel the funds, which is the price evidence right in the 1AR, and just a logical assumption that Congress has now oversight over normal means of passing the plan. Is a drop link argument and a drop reason. That's why we have reverse causal claims that we solve congressional oversight. Second is that we restore the power of the current purse because now Congress is the one who's actually managing all of these budgets. They've dropped the Waxman evidence, which should be the way you vote for it. The Waxman evidence literally says that otherwise we'd be unprepared to fight other powers. It specifically talks about other countries and other disapproval. It talks about public support, willingness to bear the cost of war, all which are needed because otherwise it would threaten national prestige, which is the literally unipolarity, which is a thesis claim that their impact cards are talking about. So we definitely access this hedge stuff way better than them. Also, it shows uncertainty, which is even worse for United States hegemony because everything is so uncertain. So other powers will strike us anyways because they think that our power is retrenching, which proves that we definitely have better inroads and we're the only ones with an external bioterror impact, which solves the terminal impacts is rule law checking, the executive better national security, all independent external offense that outweighs. The politics is said. The impact calc sounds great, but I already did impact calc as to why we access the same hedge impact through the add-on that was dropped. It says that Congress oversight makes U.S. military actions more effective. They filter out unpopular military interventions, which historically have been unsuccessful and undermines future U.S. threats. They also dropped a credibility internal link, which for the Waxman evidence says that we do have a uniqueness for the add-on. The Gwenev evidence says that there's a current atrophy of oversight powers. Think about how the executive has unilateral control over funding Homeland Security right now, and uniqueness and the link for the dissent are even worse. I know that 1AR was late, but it was because of a couple of things. First is the internal link of the second advantage, or I know that the 1AR was light on the disadvantage overall, but it was strong on a couple of things. First is that we solved the disadvantage. The internal link of the second advantage solves the impact. You should prioritize innovation over anything else. Recruitment does not matter when the trajectory of war is moving towards autonomous weapons. Prefer our evidence, which uses fusion centers to get the military up to date on the newest technologies, including UAVs. That's a Wilson. Second, the fact that there are 5 senators who have discussed the bill being put in reconciliation is not enough to vote for this dissent, revitalizing all of the military. Third, the add-on has to outweigh. The Gwenev evidence is hyper-specific. It says that congressional oversight of money is the #1 link for oversight. If those oversight powers go away, as per the counterplan, then it leads to military casualties, nuclear accidents, interventions, which subsume the impact of the dissent. Even if the dissent bolsters military readiness overall, the resulting military interventions and war will go terribly wrong absent congressional oversight. We do have uniqueness as explained above. The burden for the link is on them. Why would the app go through reconciliation? They read the dissent and it's their job, their evidence. They don't even establish an internal link between the actual bill and the accessing the larger impact. I know we didn't spend much time, but that doesn't mean that they can't actually do impact. The app is not just funding, it's also training, preparation, all of those other things. It seems like this dissent is probably super low risk in solving hegemony writ large anyways. We have better access to the larger internal link anyways, and we have an external impact that definitely always. Their only response was that funding goes to a reconciliation. No warrant, no reason. So there's definitely a better risk that we solve hegemony, and we also have like the bioter impact, which is the only external impact in this round. Good debate. Any cards on?
Debate.
I'm sending a net card doc right now.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Af, if you can separate out for the add-on the link cards which you think say the app solves the add-on, that'd be great.
I sent the net card doc.
Ani, for the card doc, do you want like relevant like advantage impact cards and stuff as well?
Yeah, you can include that. I was just saying
Okay.
for the cards on the add-on to separate them out in that way.
Okay. Okay, it's sent, Ani.
Cool. All right, I'm ready to give my decision. Is everyone ready? Okay. I voted AF. I'll start with a few thoughts on the top about key arguments. One is that disease is the most likely existential impact which should be prioritized. Another one is that the add-on is not clear offense, but plays a bit of defense to the DA. And the third is that the overall conclusion, a somewhat decent risk of the disease advantage outweighs a slightly mitigated immigration disad. I'll start with disease. The AF is winning that disease is the biggest risk, the most likely scenario for extinction, multiple cards on that in the 1AC, and that extinction is the biggest impact, irreversible, future lies, all of that. The 2NR defense is fantastic in establishing that in the status quo, it's really not a threat at all. But the AF has been answering this the entire debate with the discussion of tech development. Their 1AC card, I looked back at it to just see like, it felt a little bit like the AF was being hand wavy and just being like tech development. The 1AC card on this is quite good. It says, and I'm quoting the highlighted lines here, models are based on historical data. They fail to account for future risk, technological development. If the cost and required expertise falls far enough, the world might enter a phase where offensive capabilities dominate defensive ones. Humanity has about a 50% chance of going extinct due to such technologies, end quote. Staff is able to clearly establish like a long-term disease risk that's coming because of bioweapons that we should be concerned about. It's a pretty long-term impact at the end of the debate, but there's no real time frame distinction debate going on. It might take a while for tech development to happen, but I should be really concerned about it because there's a 50% risk of chance of extinction due to it. The AF has some inroads to solving this. It creates tech innovation of its own through funding for preemptive risk. The advantage here, but the 2NR arguments are primarily on the impact D question. So I grant the AF a decent link here. Okay, now the add-on. There's a low risk. The main reason it has risk at all is due to the lightness of the 2NR. So they have uniqueness arguments like right now the power of the purse is waning. Oh, I see stuff in the chat.
Yeah, I think the audio was cutting in and out for me, and I
Got
know
it.
Margaret said that.
I'm gonna turn off my video then. And were you able to follow what I said so far, or should I go back?
I got most.
I heard
of
most
it
of
down.
what you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's only like the last 10 seconds.
Got it. Okay. Did I start talking about the add-on?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So on the add-on, yeah, low risk, the main reason it has any at all is the lightness of the 2NR. So they have the uniqueness arguments that the power of the purse is waning now and that the executive will do bad stuff with it, including Biden, which are uniqueness cards established both by the AF and the neg in this debate. Now, there's very limited risk of the AF being able to solve this at all. There's some risk that they're reorganizing how forensic science works and coordinating a new national strategy. Congress is revitalizing its power of the purse.
Your audio.
Yeah, we lost you at
challenge that overrides exact power. I think that's the extent of. Where'd you lose me?
At revitalizing power of the purse.
Got it. Oh, yes. Some risk that through reorganizing how forensic science works and coordinating a new national strategy, Congress revitalizes the power of the purse. The 2NR response is pretty true, but it's literally one sentence. It's quote, AF doesn't create congressional challenge that overrides exact power. That's what I have in my flow. And that's like pretty good defense. Like I still grant you a lot of defense on the link there, but there's some risk of a link argument here that helps the AF. But I think that one of the problems here is that there are uniqueness problems created for the disad, and no one's really debating out what that means, right? If the executive is not really restrained now and is making terrible military decisions, then that complicates the negative's ability to have this readiness impact. And to be clear, none of this is debated out, but once I resolve that right now the executive is doing bad stuff with its power over the military, then I'm left figuring out, okay, well, how do I weigh the readiness scenario against it? Does it not matter that the executive is making terrible decisions, that Biden will do so as well? Does that not implicate readiness? None of this is being debated out. So at the end of the day, I think that the add-on functions mainly not as an impact to the app, but as defense to the disad, which is kind of how the 2A is going for it, where they're like, disease is this one clear external thing and the add-on complicates the disad. So I'll go to the disad. Like I said, I think it's only slightly mitigated. I'll start with the link. So, I mean, this is a fiat link, right? So they've interpreted the link through minimal means, not likely implementation. The 2AR doesn't extend the 1AR interpretation of fiat. So I mean, there's just a conceded interpretation of fiat that basically grants the neg a link because the bill is susceptible to filibuster, but it has a funding mechanism. Reconciliation is an option. Reconciliation would require fewer votes, so it's the minimal means. That's how the app happens. So the plan has to use reconciliation, which means that So I think definitely a link. On the uniqueness level, minimal uniqueness defense for the AF. I mean, the 5 senators and 8 thing is fine, but the neg has read more cards indicating that it's a thing. It's not great, but it's enough that I think there's some uniqueness here. But then when we get to the terminal impact, I think at the terminal impact level, the AF is still winning that disease is the existential impact that should be prioritized, especially given the lack of any kind of time frame discussion. There's some risk of turns case, but it's just not developed enough for me to just be like, this significantly takes out the advantage. I'm not sure exactly why turns case would take out the app's ability to create innovations for preemptive response to disease, for example. So that's how I evaluated the debate. Clearly, I had to make a lot of decisions on how relative things played out on my own. Like, how did the app internal link disease compare to DA turns case? How did the uniqueness for executive power high now and being used in bad ways interact with recruitment key to readiness, et cetera? So I think, you know, both sides would benefit a lot from clearing up a lot of these questions, and the debate became rather messy by the end. So that's my decision. Do you all have any questions?
Yeah, I have one really quick. It's just like, do you think that, okay, so our issue with the add-on was like, I thought that it was a disadd to the counter plan, not like offense for the AF.
Right.
Obviously should have made that assertion clear in the 200. I understand that part. Like, I agree with you. Do you think for what we had with the add-on, do you think that like just better impact defense would have gotten us anywhere in terms of outweighing the disease impact in the 2NR?
Yeah, a few things there. So yeah, I mean, initially, I also thought in the debate that this is a disadd to the counter plan, like exec reappropriates funds, overturns power of the purse, that's bad. But the AF pivots it and changes it into an add-on, I guess, anticipating that if you don't go for it, that they can try and turn it into some offense. And so the AF argument at the end is, and this is what the 1AR reads cards on, is right now executive power is eroding the power of the purse. Congress rechanneling funding and using it to, you know, for its own benefit revitalizes the power of the purse and therefore is some check against an executive. To be clear though, my main decision with the add-on is not about the link, it's about the uniqueness. It's the fact that right now the executive is doing, like, has the power, like the power of the purse is eroded, executive doesn't have good checks on it now, and exec doing bad stuff with the military is defense creates uniqueness problems for readiness. I think that's the main way that the add-on played into my decision in this debate, not that the AF was able to revitalize it. And there I think I'm giving the negative a lot of credit because once more, the 2NR's only line is congressional, or the AF is not a congressional check on the executive, but because it seems quite true, I give the 2NR credence there. But you know, I still have some risk of the AF stuff. They read cards, they explained it, and the 2NR doesn't have more than what I just described.
That makes sense. Do you think that if we had conceded the solvency deficit, that like there was that court ruling that restricted the executive's capability, like the strike down deficit, and said that like residually solved the add-on because any future executive overreach should be struck down, would be a sufficient answer? Or do you think that the only like way to get out of that after the 1 hour was just to read more cards?
Well, I think do both. Like extend the court stuff as a check and then read a couple of cards and you're probably fine. Read a couple of cards and then just, you know, analytically distinguish your readiness impact from whatever bad stuff their cards say the executive is doing or will do in the future.
Okay, and then my last thing is on the disease debate. Like, it seems like you kind of resolved that versus the impact to readiness with like a time frame distinction. Do you think that better impact calc in the 2NR would have helped bolster that, or do you think that we would just need better case defense in the first place?
Wait, sorry, what did you say about the time?
Oh, the time frame distinction. You said that was like lack of that meant that you aired AF in terms of the disease impact. Do you think that we just need better disease impact defense, or do you think that just like better impact for the 2NR would?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you have like more structural disease defense, like about the ability of, but you know, disease to spread effectively, that's more long term in that regard, because your evidence is like very much status quo. Terrorists don't have the capabilities, et cetera, which is great. I think it helps you, but I think you need a second piece of like, this is structurally not a risk in the long term. There are problems with making disease spread, burnout, like that kind of stuff could help you out there. And then what was the other part of the question?
Oh, it was just like
Oh.
barring us having that evidence in this debate. Do you think?
Yes, time frame. Yes, I think some kind of like time frame distinction, and our impact is existential push in the 2NR would be good, because like it feels weird when you're debating the disease AF and they read the cards to be like disease is the existential impact, that you're sort of just extending that readiness as critical because of revisionist powers, but you're not impacting that out in the context of the disease impact framing that the AF has, right? And that's pretty much all the 1AR says, right? The 1AR kind of concedes all your arguments about why it's not possible now. And it's just like, it's an existential risk. It might be like long-term, but there's a 50% chance that with the trajectory of tech development, humanity will go extinct because of like disease stuff. So given that, I think the 2NR needed to adapt to that and make a time frame and be like, at that point, their impact is literally so long-term that if you are convinced that the app would cause a great power war now, the risk that that goes existential would outweigh the risk that, hundreds of years down the road, someone develops technologies that would cause extinction through disease.
Okay, those are my only questions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering about the newness of the turn in the 1AR and whether or not you thought that should have been a bigger press in the 2NR. Or if you felt like it was justified.
So a couple of things on that I'll say. So the 2AC, if I remember correctly, had cards on this. So they already introduced the power of the purse discussion. So I didn't think that the 1AR cards were unjustified in that respect. Is there a particular? Are you talking about like pivoting the disadd to the counterplan into an add-on to the app, or what specifically are you talking about?
Just that
I feel
becoming.
like, yeah.
I interpreted the sort of like 2AC arguments about power of the purse as a rationale for why either the executive wouldn't be able to fund the agencies in the first place, or that it would instigate these sort of like intragovernmental disputes. And then in the 1AR, obviously that expanded to be a lot more offensive.
Yeah, the thing is, those arguments are so connected. It feels like the newness is best deployed by you to just justify you reading cards that the 2AR obviously can't like read cards against, than it is to justify striking the 1AR off the flow.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the time spent on Kondo, I think a little bit of that was like a reputational thing, that our understanding was that the app goes for Kondo a good amount. So like, what would you have cut to make that more expedient?
Let's see, there was a lot, right? So I would have cut a lot. It makes sense like to cover it, and I guess if you think the app might go for it, it's just good to cover your bases. But here, let me pull up what I have on Kondo. But definitely, as the 2NR was happening, I was like, okay, you have a ton of offense. Can you remind me which flow Kondo is on? Because I'm having trouble finding it.
The multi-plank exact counterplan.
Ah, yes. Let's see. I would say it's like, once you've done the neg flex stuff, you're like, the topic is hard, and then you've done the impact calculus about how this turns and outweighs their offense. Then the additional stuff about like 2AC efficiency and strategy and things like that, like minor defensive arguments and stuff, you don't really need. That being said, I don't think the 2NR is, like, I think you cut a little, but I don't think time pressure is the main thing with the 2NR. I feel like there are some efficiency things, like on the disadd, for example, like even the little bit of time you spent on the link was not at all important to me, because I was like, the link is fiat based, and the link, that's all you need to win. So just make that point. But yeah, I think you can cut a bit on Kondo, and maybe that helps you do some more of the analysis that I'm talking about.
And then in the 2NC, like, do you think it would have been unjustifiable to introduce a plank that just has the court uphold the funding misappropriation in case it was a misappropriation? Or did you feel that the way we answered the deficit was fine?
I thought the way you answered the deficit was fine. Of course, I'd have to like wade through the cards and stuff to see like what the truth of, how much can be reallocated now from existing stuff, the 2NC analysis about categories of funding, like I'd have to go back and evaluate that. So I thought your analysis on face seemed fine. I don't think it's inherently unjustifiable to introduce a plank, like you just introduce a plank and defend it. I think that's okay.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a quick question about 2AR strategy. Sorry.
Yep.
Like, I felt like I just did not reserve enough time.